Node is obviously like growing really quickly, changing really quickly, and so we have upcoming, more meetups planned where we want to continue to kind of grow this community and get more people, coming to these meetups and trying to keep up with or teach each other about what's going on with Node. And if you have any ideas for future talks that you want to see or you want to give, or anything else like that, proposals for kind of things you'd like to see from Node, please let me know. Or there's a couple other Valencia people here. Keenan in the back, Carson are two of the other engineers here, so feel free to talk to us. And also, I'll just throw out the obligatory, we're hiring, so if you're interested in Node and you want to talk about that, also please come and talk to us. And I think that's about it. If anyone has community announcements or something like that, we can do a little time at the end if anyone else wants to get up here and make some announcements. But for now, I'll turn it over to Erik.
Thank you. First, thank you everybody for coming. This is pretty crazy awesome that there's so many people here. So thank you all. Today I'm going to be talking about building prototypes, Node, Angular, and a whole bunch of other technologies that I used at my job at 3Pillar, especially web components. And so I'm a UX engineer at 3Pillar. 3Pillar Global's in Fairfax. We are hiring as well. Shameless plug. I got to work on a lot of prototyping projects since I've been there the last 7 months. And so it's a totally different mindset, and it was a pretty crazy journey. And I'm just talk about everything that happened. And I have two parts to this type of talk. So I know this is Node, Node, and we're going to be talking about Node, but we're going to be talking about a lot of other technologies as well, and prototyping in particular, and technology choices that I had to face and my colleagues had to face as far as getting what we consider to be a prototype out there. And I'll explain what a prototype is to us and why we were building them and the purposes for those. But also an exploration of dealing with emerging technologies. So every once in a while, you come upon something where you're able to experiment because you have the resources. And so you take the next step to say, hey, I'm going to look at this and see what happens. Can we use this for our production applications in the future? Can we use it for prototyping or what have you? I know that web components is a buzzword out there now. It's very loaded as far as what it means. So when I talk about it, I don't want people to be like, dude, you've mentioned it 20 times. Can you please just tell me what it is? So at a very high level, web components is a new set of standards. It's still in progress. It's still in flux. And it's set by the W3C, the WebApps group, and also key people at the W3C and Mozilla and Google are the biggest proponents of this. So they've been pushing it to simplify, modularize, and improve the way that we build apps at a component level and UI in general. Because most of us love the DOM, especially if you're working with IE8 and back. So, but it's a struggle. So so that set of specs is an umbrella term to sort of kind of alleviate that for us in the future. So from this talk, expectations you guys can have. I'm going to talk about kind of what we did at 3Pillar, and you'll notice my title is UX engineer, which when I tell that to people, they're like, yeah, so what the hell does that mean? And I get people applying for the job that I have who are back-end developers, who are front-end developers. So basically, in a nutshell, what I get to do is innovate and play with ideas and build something out of those ideas. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a product, but it's going to be a test of what a product could be. Which is really exciting for me, because prior to this, I worked as a Ruby developer, JavaScript developer at Bloomberg over in DC. And it was a great job, but I worked on the same project for 3 years. So it's, day in, day out, you're doing the same thing. You don't get to really play and explore other areas of art and craft. So I'll be talking about the prototype journey, the mindset of things, how you can use prototyping mindset now and in the future, technologies that you might want to consider using. Polymer, which is a Google project. So Polymer is a framework on top of web components, which helps us to use web components today. So we'll talk about that, and native web components as well, meaning it's going to be in the browser. You won't need a framework for that eventually. So web components code explorations, I have some code in here. I wanted to have a full GitHub repository for everybody, but my eyes started to bleed at 2 a.m. the past week, so hopefully I'll have something you guys can have with that, but I do have code samples in here. If you want to follow along, there is a public URL, which is proto.3pillarglobal.com, nova_node. So I wish I could show you that here. Maybe I can move it. Yeah. So, and I'm using Reveal. So this is a framework, if you're not familiar. Reveal.js, developer over in Sweden, and this is really great. So this actual slide deck is a prototype in itself. So you'll see a lot of hacky stuff in there, so please excuse the crazy code. Does everyone have the URL? Good? Okay. And also at the end, kind of lessons learned and forward thinking, like how would you use this in production? How can you use this in prototyping, and what kind of considerations you have to have? That's the last piece of that. So when I came into 3Pillar, we are a product services company. We deliver products that have purposeful engineering. So we talk about this with clients and like, well, what does that mean? Well, we build things that actually have a purpose, not just build it, give it to you, we don't care what you do with it. We want to make sure that we're building these things for the right reason, or we're not building them. So that's where I come in. I was hired to do prototyping. So I would say, let's test these ideas. Let's talk with the client, figure out what they want, and do a lot of user testing, user experience, iterate on that process, and figure out, is this the real problem? Because clients will come to you and say, hey, you know, we really need a mobile app. Well, do you really need a mobile app? Let's find out, why do you need a mobile app? You know, talk to me about that. You know, what are the problems that you're facing? So we really do a lot of exploration of, we use processes in design thinking, that type of stuff. So we talk about empathy and understanding the clients. So it's a lot of not just coding, but a lot of figuring out what are the ideas that you want to get across for this product and test them early. Because, I mean, if you build something and then you have 3 or 4 sprints before you realize that, hey, this is probably not what we think it is, you're going to spend a lot of money on the product. So with that said, when I was hired, we wanted to come up with our idea of what a prototype is and what it's not. So what it's not production ready. It's not something that is complete. It's not something that you can give to a client and say, this is your product. It's not any of those things. It is more of a test for ideas. So we came up with this idea that it would be a platform for testing these ideas. But also, the developer in me wanted to say, you know what, we want to accelerate this. We want to make this reusable so that, you know, down the road we can have a set of components that we can just plug in and add certain things. So that was the idea, eventually, that we came to as a consensus. The reality, though, was that every project led us to realize that we have so much limited time, limited people, and little product context. So like we'll start products and have no idea what these things are, so we have to do research. We have to do market research, we have to do user research and figure out what these things are. And so with prototyping, we found that you still needed to add in this component of research before you start coding stuff. So it leaves that small fraction of time to actually do your coding. So it's important to keep that in mind. So we decided to approach just the first definition that we came up with to test ideas. So exploring the unknown. So we don't have a product fully defined. So we needed more context so that our clients, stakeholders, that us, that we can make educated decisions on these things. We needed a better understanding of design and flow, but we were really short this is the functionality we want, but what do we really want to convey as far as the overall user experience? And style guides and wikis and mockups and stuff like that, they only got us so far. You'd give that style guide to a developer, well, you have all the colors, maybe you have the ideas of the pixel perfect widgets in there that you want to put in, but it doesn't really convey the experience of it. So that led us to say, well, why don't we do HTML, CSS, JavaScript sort of explorations of this stuff? Because the way it is now, we're spending more money, we're spending more time, and we're wasting resources. So, that said, I will warn you, this mindset is a little strange if you've worked in production for high scale, especially dealing with production code. So the prototype mindset. And I tell this to people, and keep in mind the context that when I worked on production code, there's build processes, there's testing, test first, pair programming if you have the facilities to do so. You have a lot of these practices in place that make sure that your code's maintainable later on. So we had to throw a lot of that away. So there's no unit testing and no cross-browser code. I had lots of jobs and was very lucky to be an IE bug expert. So I got to work with IE 6 and 7 on a daily basis not too long ago. I am so thankful that I don't have to do so much of that anymore. And hopefully none of you will have to in the future. So we have a target browser, usually, depending on the client, what we need. So in most cases, I'm able to use something like Chrome Canary, which is the developer build for Chrome. It's usually 2 builds behind the mainstream Chrome that you'll see. So favoring speed over best practices. I probably would get smacked by some of my friends for this, but we really needed to be fast with these things if we were going to make them effective. So using frameworks and turnkey solutions. So the Node community in particular is not a big fan of this in general. I find when I talk with people, they're like, at least for large scale, it's like there's some frameworks everyone goes to. Express is pretty acceptable, in mainstream, but a lot of people are like, build your own, roll your own, whereas like in Rails, it's like, oh, there's a gem for that, let's just use that, So it's a little different mindset, but being a front-end developer and having something like Bower is so awesome to deal with, to have that package management system, to work with, Bootstrap. And, we actually have Bootstrap in a lot of these, Twitter Bootstrap, for those, living in a cave, but Twitter Bootstrap, for those of you not familiar, it's a little frustrating sometimes because it's like, there's so much stuff, copy, paste this, put this in here, and, but it works, right? So I actually had two out of the last 3 prototypes had it in there, and I pulled it out of one because I was like, I'm sick of this, I want to try something else, I'll put in another solution. It's just so much easier to put in Bootstrap. It's just not as flexible. So, there's using stuff like that, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, is really helpful when developing prototypes. Also, smoke and mirrors over true fidelity. One thing I had to do was when you're talking with clients, especially the larger clients who have lots of money and they want their product to look beautiful. When you're building these things, you have to kind of pick a fidelity level. Meaning, does it visually look like a product? And sometimes you may not want that to happen. You might want to have like just some boxes or things with some data that makes some sense. Some colors, but not really good visual design, right? You may. And there's one prototype I actually worked on where a lot of it, because of the time constraints, we had a week to develop it. I was the only person doing the development on it. And so I had to throw in image maps. Don't cry. It's where you put in, basically it's like when I first learned HTML, just cutting up images, putting it in, wrapping stuff up, and then for the key functionality pieces, for the flow where you put stuff in, that's where you focus a little more of the detail. Maybe you make it a little bit better because you're gonna have the CTO or whatever look at this. You want to make sure that what you're trying to convey to them is the idea. Remember, this is to test ideas. This is not, to say, this is a product. Here you go. This is done. This is more to validate that, hey, we know you want to build this. Let's test out this piece of it first, iterate on that, and keep going with that. So that's that same key where, are you presenting this? How are you going to deliver this type of prototype? It's not just hand them a PDF with a bunch of links or do this HTML application and give it to them. Are you going to present it? Like, you're going to demo it? Are you going to integrate stuff like Arduino or like Android devices with NFC? How are you going to integrate everything with this? It's the whole presentation of it as well. So with all that, this brings me to the technology choices. So I came up with a couple of challenges in my own mind of what I really needed to do. So I needed a seed template, and initially, obviously, so I was using Angular, so I went to Angular Seed. I played with a few different things. I ended up kind of taking stuff I liked from Mean, combining that with Express, and building out just a basic scaffold of here's my models, here's my views, and Express is going to deliver all of my routes, it's going to deliver my middleware, and I'll just work with it that way. So I used Grunt to accelerate the development. I tried Gulp on one of these. That was hard. You had to be on 0.11 or master or something. So things broke all over the place. But Grunt is really nice because it has the same interface for all the plugins. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar. Even front-end developers are using this. So Grunt.js and plugins like Concat. I tried using all the different preprocessors for CSS, Sass, Less, Stylus. All worked really, really great. But having that watcher in there is really key, so that if I'm developing something and changing something in development, using Grunt Watcher to watch those changes and then restart the server and do whatever it has to do, that's been really key. Data was another big issue. I tried several things. The first prototype I did at 3Pillar consisted of several JSON static files, and almost went to a database, but then realized that was a very unique client. So we needed to kind of play with different things. So I still use some JSON files, client-server models, so storing different key values inside of the models that I'm using for some of this data, and only using data when it's necessary. So if I don't need the data there, I may just have a static image or something to show some of this. But if the data is going to be interactive, I'm definitely going to stub it out. I found HTTP backend is actually really cool. This is a piece from Angular, so you can stub out requests. Really powerful for this. So the server part. So I did my first adventure into DevOps. I built out a prototype server on AWS and Linux AMI, and I use PM2 as my daemon. If you use Forever, it's very similar. PM2 is nice though because now you can do PM2 LS, and that'll show you all of the applications that you have running with Node. You can run it in forked mode or clustering. This is really, really powerful to see. They also have like a web interface, so you can navigate into your browser and look at all the stats and monitor things as well. Find out the memory usage. So very powerful. PM2 is a Node module. So for those familiar with NodeMon or Forever, it's pretty cool. Express, I started out just using Express straight, like out of the box with the express.static. But then I sort of branched out and said, well, let me look at Mean and what they're doing with the structure, since it's very Angular focused. And I took a lot of those concepts and built out my own little pieces of that. And of course Node, as experimental as I am, I've tried playing with Harmony flags in here. And for prototypes, I've found it's best to use the latest stable. If you've tried playing with Perl, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's a little difficult, at least for me it was. And considering my background, I've only been using Node.JS on a daily basis for 7 months now. So before that, just playing with it, other jobs. So also avoiding rewriting boilerplate code. So using jQuery for low-level DOM manipulation. As a front-end developer, I really feel like we should move away from jQuery for production. Just my own personal opinion. But it is a great tool. For prototyping, it makes it so much easier to just do stuff. So, and Angular is just fantastic for building out the larger stuff. Like just the filtering, working with directives. Even at the prototype level, not just production, it's just so much faster to get that high-level DOM manipulation. And because it does all the stuff for you underneath the directives and the controllers. And Bootstrap. Like I said, I tried to move away from that, but I keep getting pulled back. It's like the mafia. And using whatever works, basically being very practical about this. So if image maps work in that case, that one case I had to do, inline styles. I try to avoid obtrusive JavaScript, but if that works, I'm going to do it, just to make it faster. And I've been bitten by this, so don't take this as, well, I'll just do whatever I want. There's been like, half a day wasted in some cases because of this, but you have to keep that in mind. Just keep going. You don't stop. And explore new technologies. So, yeah, so I played with several different things. I put CSS Flexbox in here, which is a CSS3 spec from W3C, because I tried playing with that with layout. And if you get the right syntax, it works. So if you're not familiar with it, yeah, there's a huge learning curve coming from grids. Like Flexbox basically is a layout module, right? So it'll set up grids for you, and the advantage to it is that you get true vertical centering, you can move things all over the place, and it's very simple syntax once you get it right. Getting it right is the harder part, so because there's different versions, the spec was changed several times. Web components, which I'll talk about some more, and Polymer, which I'll talk about as well. So, the 3-pillar prototype unicorn. So usually, with the prototypes, what happens is you're building this thing and so fast, all right, we're done. Let's make sure that it's working correct. Let's run through the presentation of how we're going to do this, and then move on to the next. But in one case I was working on an internal project and doing a prototype for that, and we happened to have people who were not working on projects who were very interested in the technologies. So I was able to get 3 other developers to come help me with this prototype. That was great, because now I can experiment and say, you know what, I'm going to throw in this other stuff that I've been reading about and see kind of what happens, what are the challenges that we face, and what could we use this for, or could we use this for that acceleration piece I was talking about initially, that second part of prototyping. So Product Vector was the unicorn at 3-pillar, and that's a project that's still in process now, and that was to help our salespeople, to help the marketing, to help everyone internally develop the product and go through the steps for that. So Sean Osborne's product manager over there for that, and if you have questions about that, or follow, you can contact him or follow on Twitter. I'm sure stuff will be posted by Will, our digital marketing mastermind there. So web components. So what are these? Has anyone actually read about them or heard about them?
Is this kind of similar to Shadow DOM?
So Shadow DOM is one piece. It's definitely. And I'm going to explain that. So there's 4 key parts. Actually 5 now, but the 5th one is not really viable to use yet at all. It's more of a concept right now. It's still being spec'd out. But that's decorators if you're interested for that piece. But the 4 main pieces are templates, which if you guys are familiar with handlebars, mustache, Angular templates, things like that, Pure.js. So those are like, they use inner HTML and string manipulation to create these templates. So this is an actual HTML tag that has its own inner DOM, right? So what that means is if you use a template tag in your code, it's not going to, anything that's inside it is not going to be recognizable by the DOM. And I'll show you an example of that. The shadow DOM is the encapsulation piece that is by default in these templates. Okay, and the shadow DOM is basically a nested DOM, which is hidden from the outside document. Think of it as the inception of the DOM. So, if you, let's see, I'm just going to quickly go here. So, in Chrome Canary, there is a show shadow DOM flag for the developer tools. Everyone see that? No, probably not. Let me unfull screen this so you can see this. This is pretty awesome stuff. So, I don't know if you know this, but Shadow DOM has been used in the browsers by browser vendors for a long time now. It's just never been exposed as an API to us. So, I'm taking this off so you can see what this will look like normally. So let's see if I can find it. I'll go to Polymer, I'll show you. This is Polymer's home website. And they use Polymer elements, which I'll talk about. But take a look at this right here. Docs menu. I don't know if you can see this. No, you can't, because I'm way over there. So this is what this looks like. So that doesn't look like a normal HTML tag to me. Docs menu, there's nothing inside it apparently. Right? This is kind of what you see when you see video tag, audio tag, input, and input type range, input type whatever. But if I actually go in and go to my developer tools, this is not in every browser. I say, show me the shadow DOM. Right? Everyone saw that flag right there? I might have to no, it's right there. Now I can see there's this document fragment in there. Let me scroll over here so you can see. You see it now? There you go. And notice now we have nested components inside here. All this stuff in here that we couldn't see. So all of this is part of that shadow DOM. And accessing this is now possible for us. Firefox Nightly just added this in. So we might be able to actually do more stuff with Firefox now too. So I'll close this out. Voila. All right, so we got templates and Shadow DOM. So templates make stuff to inert, right? And we have this HTML inside of it and the Shadow DOM. You can add Shadow DOM to other stuff other than templates, any HTML element. It's under the prototype for that. So if you do like this element dot, like document dot query selector body or something, and then dot create shadow root or dot webkit create shadow root depending on the browser, right? Then you can create this root that you're able to access through JavaScript. So if you took those two pieces together and now you want to extend them and wrap them up into a custom element, something that's not like document.create element, but something that's more like, hey, this is a prototype that I'm putting onto this. I want a constructor for this. I want to be able to add lifecycle events, like on created, do this. On attribute change, do this. I want on enter, do this, or on leave, do this. You can do that with custom elements. So you can register this element in the DOM, and then you have this creation that can be reused and packaged together through imports, which are basically HTML includes that go into your head. So it's very powerful. Any questions so far? I know it's a lot of information. Nope, okay. So benefits. So one of the things that I played with was, what makes this cool? Why is this better than Angular directives? What are we really using this for? Why are we creating these things? So the more I read about it, the more I said, okay, now I see this makes it easier to encapsulate and compose these things. It makes it really versatile. But I could still do that a little, jQuery widgets used to be like a lot of what I did too. So kind of getting those to talk to each other was a pain usually. And if you're pulling somebody else's, I had a tree one I was using once. It was supposedly the best one, best maintained. But it's all like all these private or pseudo-private methods inside you can't access. There's no exposed API. There's nothing I can really do. But now I have full control of these. I have composability and extension. And true encapsulation, which is very strange if you've ever done. Like, how many front-end developers are here? Okay, so what does encapsulation mean to you? Not much, right? Everything's in the global scope. Let's pollute the window and put everything on the window, or put everything on this object. Now this is totally scoped, and there are ways to break this, which is still being worked on. But it is true encapsulation in the sense that it's this document fragment. So one of the things that really sparked my interest was this is going to be native. It's already implemented in some of these browsers to some extent. It's a standardization of these things. It's not, hey, I created this jQuery plugin or this Bootstrap add-on, or like if you've worked with Angular Strap or Angular the UI Bootstrap one. For Angular, I get frustrated with a lot of how those are built. Everything's built differently, right? And yeah, things are going to be slightly differently built in this, but there's much more standardization and understanding at a very low level of what these things are. So no external dependency overhead, except what you bring with you. So I've seen some of these components people have built, and they're pulling in entire libraries into the components. It's not really what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about, making these things small and singular, and then extending them and saying, hey, I'm going to take this list item thing I added and put it into a list. Making it so it's not this giant blob of one component, but actually composing these together. Which leads me to the Polymer project. Yeah?
Do you mix that with Angular directly? Can you mix it?
So yeah, the first exploration of components that I tried was using directives, because I used Angular when I was working with Ruby for the past, I guess, 6 or 7 months before I started with 3-pillar. And directives were great, and I still think that, yeah, if you can get away with using directive for prototyping and things like that.
Open that in Polymer.
Yeah, so I kind of see Angular as becoming more like jQuery, where it's the glue of everything. It controls your domain, your application. Whereas components are sort of like, you can put them into any application, and you have small libraries that you're using maybe, and then within that, you can build out your own smaller library just for that application as well to use. But that's just my personal opinion. It's not like standardization or anything. Question?
What is the difference between web component and iframe?
So iframe does have encapsulation, sure, and it's a one element. It's a window inside of a window, more or less. Iframes are heavy overhead in general. If you're a front-end developer, you know this, and you can see, like the iframes. There's not a lot of styling capability with them. A lot of not composability at all. You can access the parent window, but I found them much more difficult to work with. People have argued too, I've seen on Twitter too, that there's a new version of iframe. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Seamless. Okay, it's another standard emerging. So seamless iframes are supposed to sort of bridge that. So I haven't really worked too much with them, but in general, I'm more interested in the web components because it seems much more open and it has much more flexibility in that sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any others?
I don't know if you want to answer this now, or you could do it later.
Sure.
I'm wondering, if you know, what is the difference between the web components and Polymer, but as far as capabilities and advantages and the React, if you're familiar with React, Facebook React?
Just a little bit. I haven't built anything with it yet. It's something I've.
So I think it has some similar goals, it's supposed to be, components, composable, and so I was just curious if you had any idea.
So React, if you guys are not familiar, is a JavaScript library from Facebook, and I guess particularly what's the picture company?
Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram. So Pete Hunt is one of the leads on that, and so he has a talk on YouTube about what makes it different, and I think I have that in here. If I don't, I can give that to you. But my understanding with React is they're focused really on JavaScript performance and JavaScript, but their templates you're generating through like through build process using I forget you can use HTML. There's another thing that they use for that as well.
There's like a DOM builder kind of that has JSX.
Yeah,
That can build a DOM.
so that it seems like a very good. I haven't used it yet, but it seems like a very good performance boost as far as like JavaScript libraries.
So you might be able to kind of use both.
Oh sure. I mean, Angular is just one NV Star framework, right? You could use if you wanted to knock it, whatever Durandal, whatever you want to use in there. But React would be a good one to play with. I'd love to see a repository where they're doing that. Yeah.
What's the difference of controlling the scope of the DOM with an Angular controller versus Shadow DOM?
So the Shadow DOM is encapsulated, right? Everything's still exposed with a directive or a controller in that case. And those aren't bad. Those are good things, right? In fact, Angular 2 is moving towards. If you look at Brian Ford's PDF on that, he talks about how they're going to add in a lot of ES6 stuff. They're working on adding components in a replacement. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. Of the HTML templates that they have for security reasons and for the fact that it's going to be more needed and probably faster. All right, so Polymer is a framework built on top of web components. So it uses that technology. But what's really cool with Polymer, that is why I gravitated toward it, is they have this idea of a platform.js file. So what that is a set of polyfills. Does everyone know what a polyfill is? Anyone not know? Okay, so polyfill is a way we can take a technology or a set of technologies and check the browser. Like Modernizer is a polyfill director, if you will, right? Modernizer is a project that'll say, hey, do you have WebGL, browser? Browser, tell me. Okay, no? Then I'm going to take this other JavaScript hack and put that in, so you'll be able to work. That's okay, don't worry about it. Or, oh, you have it? Just use this native stuff here. So it fills in the gaps for these things. Everyone cool with that? Okay. So the polyfills that they have for platform are the Shadow DOM. They have a polyfill for the templates, for the custom elements pieces, and also the imports. So Polymer project actually says that these polyfills will work for you if you put them in for IE 10, IE 11, Safari latest, Firefox latest, Chrome latest, and Opera latest. So they coined it, I don't know if it's their term, but evergreen browsers, if you've heard of them. So that means that the latest browsers, they're constantly updated. That doesn't mean if I have CMonkey 5 that is the browser, it's an evergreen browser, because maybe it was done a year ago or something, like, I mean, I'm just making that one up, but like that idea of these things are constantly updated with standards, and also they are the latest built things. Make sense? Okay, so evergreen browser. So right there gives you a much broader scope, right? So now you don't have to worry, oh my God, I have to develop, I can only develop my application in Chrome, and this specific build of Chrome, because that's the only way I'm going to get stuff with flags on it. So there is that advantage, so you can start building some stuff. Keep in mind, IE 10, right? I'm a huge Microsoft fan with IE. I think the .NET project and everything is really great, Office is great, but Internet Explorer is probably, it was one of the most innovative browsers of its time back in the day, but it's still catching up now. They slowed down way too much, so a lot of projects are still not viable for this. You'll have to support IE8 or have to support IE9, and probably not able to use this stuff. It would be interesting to see, though, how it does. Like if you could polyfill some other stuff into those. One of the things I don't like, too, is there's different versions of this platform.js I found. And I found some interesting because it's so rapid in the development, sometimes things will just suddenly break. So that's something to keep in mind. And then you'll have to wait a day for the next Canary build to fix that. Which is better than waiting a week like the Chrome Dev channel, right? But still, it's a pain. So Polymer polyfills this stuff up and then binds it together. And they also add in, on top of that, some other stuff. So they add in polyfills for node binding. And this is adding data to your elements. So similar idea, I guess, to how jQuery data worked, where you would store stuff on top of DOM elements in there. They've added on top of that web animations, which covers like the request animation frame. Is anyone familiar with that? Okay. You want to explain kind of what that is?
It's been a little while since I worked on it though, but yeah, I don't really remember it too well. I've contributed to the problem.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
So,
but it's been like a half a year or something like that.
yeah. So the request for animation frame, I've seen it. I mean, it's animation. It's supposed to be it's JavaScript obviously. I've seen it used in Canvas, and actually you bring up React before. React uses that for performance gains. So what they do is they stack everything into this one frame for request animation for the DOM to build the DOM up, and then they release it at the end. So there's performance in that as well, but also you have the animation advantages of it. There's template binding, which is, if you're familiar in Angular or handlebars or anything like that, you have the braces, the double braces on each side. So by default, templates do not have this in web components. So Polymer added that in on top of that, which means you have, if you have an attribute like source or something, and you want to pass that in, you can just reference that inside your HTML with those braces, and it'll know to evaluate that and interpolate it. So it's pretty powerful. Also, pointer events. I thought it was interesting. They added consistency between mobile touch events, which is a real spec out there in W3C land, which is great. So Apple started doing this already in their iOS, but for web in general, this is a great motion. But they also added in on top of that pointer gestures. So like 2-finger swipes, double taps, things like that aren't standardized in that spec, which is kind of cool. And also model-driven views. So being able to reference models inside of the DOM itself. And something that I haven't seen in talks for Polymer or web components in general is Polymer has been really good at creating elements already for you. So it's a great project to play with if their documentation still sucks currently. But it's getting better. If you go to the Polymer project or .org, you'll see these elements there. You'll see Flexbox. They have one for Flexbox. They have one for drop-downs, collapses. They have a whole bunch of these UI elements. And they have more elements on top of that. But what was interesting about Polymer too is they have these elements that are not just UI facing. They have stuff like Polymer local storage. So you can use markup to store local storage stuff and manipulate those attributes on top of that to do that. They have an Ajax one. So it's interesting the ideas that are coming out of these. And it's a set of components that you can already play with. So you don't have to build them from scratch. So that was really key why I chose Polymer to play with first. So if you're going to use native web components, currently the only browser that I've really gotten this to work on is Canary, Chrome Canary. I have a link here if you're following. You can go to Google, and then the Chrome browser, and then you find Canary. You do a search in Google for Canary Chrome, it'll show up as well. On top of that, though, you have to also in the Chrome //flags, you have to then enable these 3 flags. So experimental web platforms, you'll also get some cool JavaScript stuff with these as well. So experimental JavaScript and HTML inputs. I think you may or may not need HTML inputs anymore. It might be the native in Canary now, but you might want to test that. So Polymer chemistry. So I spoke with a developer who used to live in Falls Church around here. He's on the responsiveimages.org, and I grabbed his Polymer element for Xpicture. So if you're not familiar with the picture element, it is a spec that the HTML workgroup, I should say, is building out to cover the use case of if I'm on a mobile device and I have an image, I don't want to pull an HD image or something that's ginormous and take up all of my data and all of my usage out in one shot. So I want to make sure that I'm pulling the right sources for those images, for the right media that I have. So the spec kind of goes through, you have this picture element, you have this source set. In the source set, it's described with a media attribute that you put a media query in. And so this is pretty awesome that you can actually implement this to some extent now without actually having to work from Mozilla or Google. So this is the Xpicture. I found a cool little Escher Lego stuff here, but let me go. So this particular implementation, keep in mind, doesn't have the awesome advantage of I will only download one source, which is what the picture is supposed to do. But this will download all of the images. So just be aware of that with this particular one. We could probably get it to work with some templates and using Shadow DOM, but didn't have the time to do that. So if I scale this down, I now have a new image because my media query kicked in. This is actually working in here. I'm so shocked. That's awesome. All right. So just to show you kind of what we want to build. So what does that look like in the DOM, and what is it about? So this is pretty much the exact implementation that we asked. I don't talk about the functions themselves. I just listed them. But if you look over here, we have the script tag, which is directly wrapped in this Polymer element. And then you have the name of it. These names in the W3C spec as well have to have a hyphen in them, at least one hyphen. So you can't just do picture. This is to avoid overriding native elements. And you can extend native elements though too. That's a good point. Input content and attributes. Now I was a little confused why you would need to name these attributes at first, initially, but it does make sense, as I'll show you in the script there. So then there's our template, and in the template we have a style tag. Everything in this template, remember, the style tag is only going to be inside this template, so it won't be exposed outside. So there's specific CSS selectors in there I won't go into, but some really cool stuff like grabbing the host element. You can pierce through the shadow root by using the cat and hat select operators. So some really cool CSS if you're interested. You could look up. There's an article I think by Rob Dotson I have in here talking about these selectors. But nevertheless, it's in here. And templates also have a content tag as well. They're nested. You can have multiples of these. Does anyone have an idea of what that might do? Besides me? Anyone? Okay. So content, you can just put it in as there without the select attribute that you see. But content will take a cloned template and say anything you put inside this implementation of the copy of this template, I'm going to actually pull that in here, and instead of this content tag, I'm going to replace it with the content that you actually put in. Can you guess what the select attribute does in that case? Specifies the selector. So yeah, you're definitely on the right track with that. So now I can put, in this case, it's a source tag, right? So you could put a dot source if you had a class name, an ID or whatever you want to do. And notice the image tag has a source with some interpolation and an ID. Cool thing is, with the ID, it's encapsulated, so you don't have to worry about duplicating the ID in this case. And then it just closes off. So very simple, right? Does everyone follow the HTML? Pretty straightforward. So then over here we have a set of defaults. Our attributes are defaulted, source, source set, title, all. Then we have this thing called created, colon. So this is what I was talking about as far as extending the template and the shadow DOM. We now have this life cycle event on created callback with native, if you want to talk about the native web component implementation. Polymer just makes it simpler and says, this is just called created. So anything in here, whenever this element gets instantiated, bam, all this stuff is going to run. And there's a bunch of stuff in there if you want to look through when you get a chance. There's the this.dollar is grabbing inside of that template the ID, so it accesses the shadow root and just queries through that. And then get source from element and find match media are specific to this. There, it's just in this case, it's grabbing the media and saying, hey, let's match the media in JavaScript and say, what is our media query here? And then that gets passed to the get source element based on that. Which you don't see here, but those are the two main methods that are used in this. And the source gets set to that based on that. And then on resize, in this particular case, we're going to change it again. So initially it happens, and then we set an event on top of that that says, hey, on resize, do this. Yeah?
So do you import HTML and the JavaScript as a package? And how is that being wrapped up?
So I'll definitely show you that. So in addition to this, I also said, well, why don't we walk through and say, hey, how are we going to actually create this natively? Rather than just Polymer and adding this in, let me experiment with that. Caveat to that is, I didn't get to do that with prototyping because there's a lot of overhead to that. So I spent most of my holiday doing it, much to my family's dismay. So I played a lot with the native ones, and it's interesting to see the differences. Polymer has added a lot of magic for you, so if you're into the magic and you love the abstractions and you want ease of use, definitely go with Polymer. So let's go back to... So, like I said, lots of magic. Many optimizations with Polymer, lots of robust polyfills, easy learning curve for front-end development, well promoted and documented. If you follow HTML5 Rocks, you look at their articles, some really cool stuff on it. Erik Isaksen has a lot of great stuff with Polymer. It's well promoted, lots of elements to choose from already, those 3 libraries in particular. But you can find on GitHub if you search for Polymer, stuff you can find for people who have created stuff. And customelements.io, which is also in the appendix here, which is one of the last slides. So an active community. I was able to post stuff on the Polymer projects, like issues I had or whatever, and people would, within like a few hours, I'd get responses. So they're pretty fast. And advanced tooling and generators, which is really where I feel Node comes into this picture. So Adi Asmani, you guys familiar with him? He's a JavaScript developer in London, works for Google. He built out a lot of Yeoman stuff. I don't know if he's the actual creator of Yeoman, but that's basically a generator type of application. For different applications, I should say. So there's like, it's a command line tool that you would use, and you would say, npm install -g, Yeoman, and then you could grab other generators and stuff and do this. So there's one for Polymer. It's called generator-polymer. So if you do npm install -g generator-polymer, that'll scaffold an entire Polymer application for you already, which is really cool. And also it's very scary because you see like, whenever you use npm, right, you see like a million requests go out at once. So it is a little scary. So if you want to get up and running real fast, that's a good way. If you want to know and understand this stuff, definitely play with the native stuff to kind of get a grasp of that. So if you were going to do this for an application, right? Like I said, use generator polymer, right? And you go in, and this is assuming that you're on command. Not everyone is going to be doing this, but this is just the way that I had to do it. I couldn't find any GUI tools to really work with this. And then you can make your element, which you're going to use as an import okay? And imports, like I said, are just the packaging of this. So you would take that HTML and those scripts and put it in. And then you would actually have a reference to that. So it uses the link tag in your head, not your head, but the head of your document. And you have to have rel equals import. That's very important to do. Frustrating if you're doing it and you don't put that in, because it won't throw any errors or anything, it just won't do it. And then any JavaScript or whatever won't load you. You're like, why? Why is this not happening? And then if you want to start using it, you just throw it in, right? You put it into the DOM there. And grunt is also in the generator polymer. So you just do grunt serve, that'll open it up in the browser for you. So very simple to do. So as I was doing this, I realized, wow, this is a pretty complex thing to do with the standard web components. Polymer really lends itself to doing more of this. But it was a good experiment to play with. So basically, my process, based on the different repos that I've looked at, is to take your template and set up stuff. So I'll start with the template, I'll create the styling, I'll get it to work with the content, have an idea, a high-level concept of what I want to do, and add a script tag so that I can expose the API to the window so that you can grab that element and use it for other ones. You could alternatively nest it inside of another web component as well, which is what Polymer typically does with their elements. So this would be how I would extend this through custom elements. So I'd create a self-executing function, which would create a HTML element prototype copy that I can then extend that prototype. Is everyone here knows JavaScript to some degree, right? Okay, so we have prototypal inheritance, right? So the HTML element is the baseline for this. So HTML element prototype has very basic prototype functionality, and then you can extend it. So now I can add stuff to it if I want later on, which we'll do. And then I create a reference to the register function in the document that passes in the name and a prototype object. So in this case, I'm piecing that in, and then I'm exposing it to the window. So if I wanted to do a created callback, like we had in Polymer, this is how you would do this natively. And inside here, I will set up the query selector to grab my HTML import. And then when I do that, because I put rel import in there, I now have access to the DOM inside of that. So I can say link.import, and I can then query select it through that. So in this case, I created a naming convention where I have -tmpl for my templates. So it's just easier for me to go through. You can do whatever you want as long as you're grabbing that template. This is also good to have some sort of way to identify each one individually. If you're going to use a tooling thing like Polymer has an NPM module called Vulcanize, and Vulcanize will take your HTML imports, concatenate them together, and you can pass in, there's some really interesting values I found in there like CSP. Are you guys familiar with this security issue? So if you have inline scripts, which you saw in there, that's a security issue. You can have problems with that. So if you use CSP, what that'll do is it'll grab your script and piece it into a separate file. So it'll take all of those and piece them into a separate file. So now they're not inline scripts, they're external scripts that you can call that way. And it'll tie everything together for you, which is nice. Questions? Okay. So if you have this concatenated file, and you have a whole bunch of templates, and you haven't identified those with class names or IDs or some sort of way to grab these, you may have some issues. So encapsulate custom elements. So simple enough, you would think I'm going to append to the document, but I'm not. In this case, if I want that encapsulation, I have to create a shadow group, and then I have to actually add a clone version of my template into this. And in the spec, you can actually do clone node with false, and what that'll do is it'll move the template in there. It won't do that, but you could if you really wanted to, rather than clone it and copy it. So the reason I have these two links in here is this is a link to the developer tool settings that I just showed you earlier, but the visualizer, which is interesting, Eric Biddleman from Google had created this, where now, if you're confused about the shadow DOM as I was initially, he has this tool that he's created where you can interactively say, well, I have this shadow DOM here. I want to know, as I change these things in real time, what does it look like over here? What changes in this section? So that I know where things are in the shadow DOM. Because it can be a little tricky if you're used to that scope of the global scope being included in JavaScript. So it can be a little tricky to get your head around encapsulation in the browser. So this is a really great tool, like as I change things, like if I put in, you know, like, you notice it changes as I do it. So now I can see where that H2 fits into it based on the markup I have here. So this is a really great tool. If you're using something like Mozilla has a library called Xtags, and they have a component library built on top of that called Brick. If you're using that, they don't use all the polyfills, keep that in mind. So Shadow DOM is not even implemented inside of those two libraries, which sucks, but you'll probably get faster performance from those components. And then I can add in those custom behaviors and add them to the prototype. I can also do events inside the created and say I want to have a resize event on here. I want to have a click event or whatever you want to do inside that on created. If you have something that removes it from the DOM, you could do the on leave and on enter are also callbacks in the life cycle. So you may want to trigger some callback when it leaves the DOM to signal, hey, do something, send some data somewhere or something like that. And then your component tags. So as far as like prototyping conclusions, so if you understand the risks involved with the standards changing, if you understand developer ramp up, I mean, you're dealing with stuff like the encapsulation piece of the shadow DOM. You may or may not have some experience with that in your development team, so you might want to consider the time it'll take for them to get ramped up on that. Is it viable for prototyping? Oh, most definitely. But these are some considerations to have. This heavily depends on the developers that are involved, like I said, and the time constraints as well. Because we're all pretty smart in general, right? We can figure out stuff. We're developers. We go on to Google, Stack Overflow, whatever. We can figure out what we don't know. But how much time is it going to take you to figure it out versus how much time before you need to send this to the client? So things to consider. If you're going to do this, I would recommend using Chrome Canary as your target browser for prototyping. Use Polymer.js or a similar library like Xtags and Brick possibly. If you're not, use Platform to fill out stuff, all the gaps you're missing. So at least you can have multiple browsers that you're looking at. And also, using custom elements.io. I wrote that too. Also Polymer elements and Polymer UI elements. So in my research after the prototype that we did, I kind of tried to wrap my head around, well, this is great. How would I actually use this for a production app? And you're probably not going to see those really until the end of this year or even a little after, where they're the large scale ones at least. We might see smaller ones before that. Chrome is on the track for their main Chrome build. It's going to have this stuff native without flags. They're saying mid-year, so that's kind of exciting. But we know these things are constantly in flux, so that may change at any time. I kind of see these as being built out as small and composable. You want to have smaller libraries too. You don't want to have giant things that people are going to pull in. Like, I think the Polymer UI is sort of a mistake that way, where it should be broken out into smaller, more controlled areas that you can pull. But that's you can decide. The great thing about this is it's flexible and it's extendable, and you have those 4 key technologies in there. And if you're using Dart also, Dart has an implementation of Polymer. So, which is really, really exciting to see that other languages are working with this. And so AngularJS or MV star frameworks for your application domain. jQuery will probably go away, right? And we'll be using Angular for all of the binding of everything, or you know, React or whatever, some of these tools. The only reason Angular is really winning this race for the MV star right now, I think, is you know, or Ember, I guess it's sort of the two main ones, is just the marketing behind it. They all have their own pluses and minuses. So if you're using React or you're using Ember or even Knockout, that's great. It's going to serve the same purpose. And acceleration with task runners and generators. So I talked about generator Polymer, where it's easy to get stuff up and running. On top of that, generator Polymer offers a command line interface where you can generate these Polymer elements on your command line. So it's like, you know, all right, build me an element with this name. Throw in some life cycles from your command line. So you don't even have to type out the HTML, which is nice. You know, I'm sure that we'll see stuff in like WebStorm, things built out where you're, you know, you're having Angular mixed in with these things as well. And also plan for security, but don't pre-optimize. I think it's really important to understand that, like I said, with the CSP issue, where you have inline scripts on these things, Polymer project is taking that seriously. Vulcanize has a grunt plugin also, so you can use that and pass in that flag if you're not comfortable with that. Gulp has a Vulcanize as well, although I couldn't get it to work correctly. But it's interesting to see how fast these things are coming out. These generators are evolving. So thank you. That's just my thoughts with prototyping. I have a blog that I post stuff on user experience and development called runningwithcode.wordpress.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. I also have a LinkedIn on LinkedIn. Definitely, I've been posting everything I find. I post it. A lot of people have been posting emerging technologies like the service worker, if you guys are familiar with, for offline, replacing the app cache, and some really exciting technologies. So thank you. Thank you. So any questions? No?
With the user testing, are you having your clients download code from Canary, or are you just selling?
So typically, that's a good question actually. Typically for our engagements, I've been lucky enough that I'm actually presenting. So I can bring the laptop, or if somebody else on the team, like I'm usually working with a UX visual designer or a researcher. So those people will actually, maybe they'll present. And so I'll give them, my computer, or tell them, hey, go download this, and I'll enable everything for you. So that's what we've been doing. But yeah, there is cases where this one prototype I had to do, IE10 was my target because they're a big Microsoft shop corporation. So I just said, hey, what are you using now? And figuring out that. So if they have to, like that CTO example I was saying before, that's who's going to use it. So I have to know what they have and then develop for that.
How big is Polymer currently?
It's a good question. It is huge. And also the polyfills especially compose a big majority of that. So I found that the way that they build platform.js from those polyfill repositories is a little insane with document.write. So I'm looking into creating a more modernizer version, so to be able to pull in what you need directly from the source, like build it prior to deploy for that. But I haven't worked on it too much. But yeah, it's really heavy there. And what Polymer's plan for this to do is to pull these out as it goes stable across the browser.
What's it be a while?
It'll be a while, yeah. And they've said that too on their blog as well. There's also some good articles on messaging with these. Eric Biddleman has a good article on that where getting these web components to talk to each other. That's really important, I think. Sure.
So with the polyfills, how does it, the polyfills are so you can get it running on the older browsers, right?
Well,
Or
Evergreen, so
Evergreen, oh I see.
yeah, so the more up-to-date the latest versions of browsers that are constantly updated.
So what would happen if you run the same app, you know, you said you usually use Chrome Canary, what would happen if you run it on the regular Chrome? Like, would it, you get
So-
some of the functionality? but not-
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll see, because they're 2 builds behind, right? 2 full builds. So you'll see some of it, and not all of it. And a lot of times you'll have to still have those flags in place. Like HTML imports, I think the flag was just recently taken away, like I said. So we will, you would still need the flag in the main Chrome.
Okay.
So yes, there is that. So like with IE10, I decided it was faster to not use Polymer or any web components for that reason.
Could you show the presentation URL again?
So what is it?
Could you show the presentation URL again?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sorry. Yes, I can. So if this changes, I'll post on Node, because this is our prototype server, as you can see. So it may actually be taken off. And there is a password also, and because of that, which I want to take off, but we have to leave it in there for now. And it's just Nova_node, same as in the URL there. And then the password is presentation. Sure.
Have you created any of your own enablement plans that get you started faster than?
Yeah, I did, but they're all under 3-pillar. So currently, because I was building out, like we did one for you know what Harvey balls are, product management. I didn't know, so.
No,
So like I built out a version of these Harvey balls, which are like, they determine, this is a quarter complete, this is, it's like circles that are like, boxed into 4 pieces. And then you have them so that they show you the level of completion of something. So I created a Polymer one for that. Also, I could probably show you next steps, which is just, we had a little, like an arrow link at the bottom of the page on each one of those in Product Vector. And that was a web component. And none of the code was used from prototyping to do in production, so a lot of it was angularized. So they took those ideas and concepts and just made directives or whatever they're working. Maybe I can put one of the smaller ones on GitHub. I'll post it in Node if I can.
thanks.
Also, in this presentation, when you do go to it, there is an appendix in the back, which I put a lot of stuff. I went through the LinkedIn group that I organized, and I tried to grab as much information as I could so that you could do your own research on these things. So there's a lot of general information, compatibility tables, related ECMAScript 5 and 6. Kind of guys have a really good scope of what browsers support those type of things, and talks. Some great presentations. So there's one in here too. I have a special thanks for people who helped on this. Like I was in contact with Super Soul, who works at Mozilla, and Rob Dodson, who just got a job with Google. He's been an extremely big help. He has some great repositories that have good native web components. And he also did this talk at Cascade.js, which I took a lot of ideas from, and it was really great. So if you get a chance to, even if you don't, I know I care more about the special thanks than all of you, but it's important. Like these people helped a lot in my research, so I definitely would check out. And out of all of those, definitely look at this one.
Since you're probably working on sub-projects for your larger organization, you might run into it, but do you have any go-to solutions for user management or?
For user management, like
authorization and application of that. Where you go.
so for the prototyping, what I've had to do is just use I use just basic auth from Connect. So because we didn't need any high-level security, we just needed enough that you couldn't just access it without knowing passwords. So no, I guess is the shorter answer than that. wants to build some cool web component stuff? Let's pair program. Thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Real quick, does anyone else have any announcements, community announcements?